All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to take a look at just kind of how you get on the portal and log in for your AP exam, which you need to do before the day of the exam, which the exam is next Friday, May 15th at 1 o'clock p.m. They do advise you to get on 30 minutes before, so if you want to go ahead and put in your head kind of 12:30 next Friday to go ahead. I mean, it's really fast. They're just worried that if you get on and your computer doesn't work or you get disconnected, that gives you plenty of time. I'm going to do one with you today. I'll show you. It doesn't take but a couple minutes. They ask that you do that then. So we've got that next Friday. We're going to look at the portal that you need to use to take the exam. Then we're going to look at kind of a cheat sheet I've given you as to how to quickly ensure that you're doing the right steps to answer the question. And then the last thing we're going to look at today is last year's DBQ. They give you every year, they post like sample answers and what's a good answer and what's a bad answer. And I just want to go through some of them with you. Now that we've talked a lot about it and we've kind of walked through this together, you can see what I'm talking about what a good answer looks like and then why some of these bad answers don't have enough information there. And I think that once you guys see this, you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So I think it always helps for you to see it as well, the good examples and the bad examples. So let's start off though and again, I put this link on the invite today. So it's this coronavirus update. And so what it's going to ask you to do here is, this is the splash page when you land on it is going to say this right here, practice and get ready. And it's going to ask that you utilize these demos. So you have the be prepared demo and the practice with the actual test itself. So if you click on this, it's going to take you to a checklist. Okay. And again, if you can't see, if you're kind of on the phone right now, it might be better to watch this video when I post it later and you can kind of look at it. And it's going to take you through a checklist. And the checklist is, I mean, pretty straightforward. That you have all of these things, that you know the name of your exam, the date of your exam, the start time, write it all down, write down your AP ID. And again, you're going to get this confirmation email 2 days before the exam that will have that AP ID on there. So you want to make sure that you get that and have all that done where you're not scrambling the day of the exam. So again, I'll remind you next week, but 2 days before the exam, you'll get that. And they have a lot of these, am I ready for the test? Again, I don't want to go over this all this with you guys. You guys know this stuff, but you do want to make sure that you got good internet service, that when you click on a browser that it works. And the only browsers they use, which I don't even know any other ones, they have Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or Edge. So as long as you use one of those, it'll open up the exam and the link there. And again, you need to have that AP ID they'll send you. And you need to make sure that if you write out the exam, which I'll kind of walk you through this, that you have that at the top. So that's the basic overview of the checklist. But again, you can go through there and see some of the other specific things they have. But if you go to practice with the demo, this actually will be the exam. This is what it'll look like. So I think you'll be kind of interested in this. There's the video tour, and then there is I'm not going to watch the video. I want to, okay, where is that? So I'm going to do practice with a demo, and then they have their password on here, which is just practice. So you go on there, you'd enter your ID of what they send you. You're then going to enter in, and notice it'll have this timer across the bottom of the screen to tell you when the exam starts. So just enter your name. Your email address, date of birth, which, by the way, this is a lot easier than it normally is. Normally, this is like a 20 question deal that takes a solid 30 minutes to do. I tell them I'm taking this test from home. I accept to share my scores. I accept the terms and conditions. And then it takes me right to my options for the exam. So that's all the registering. That's it. So like I told you, it's not going to take you but a minute, but they do ask that you get on there early just in case things freeze up. Here are your options. You can add a text file, so you could actually write it out in Notepad or on a doc, and then attach that file. You can attach a photo. So if you want to write it out and then take a picture, and I'm going to show you, they have some kind of examples of what like the photos look like. Like you see here, they just have that student ID at the top and then their initials. And then boom, there it is. Took a picture of something they wrote out. So you have that option. And then you can copy and paste. You could literally type it up in a Word document, copy everything you wrote, and then paste it on here and send that off as well. So those are your options of ways that you can answer the question. Now I want to go back and show you. Okay. And so the exam itself, whenever you get through here, and you do the code, it'll tell you how much time you have. Okay, I already did this once. And so what it's going to do, I'll go ahead and talk to you here for a second. It's going to make me wait till this countdown goes down from 4 minutes. So when you do that, what's going to happen next is as that countdown goes down, once it's over, that'll then start your exam. Once it starts your exam, you will have that little monitor that'll be the running timer going. You can knock it off or you can leave it there. I would advise you to leave it there. I know that can sometimes be stressful to have like a clock ticking down, but I don't think you want to forget about it. You know, you don't want to all of a sudden only have a few minutes left. And as I go through this cheat sheet with you, I'm going to kind of point to, hey, you know, you should do this in about 5 minutes. You should do this in about 10 minutes. I think that kind of helps as you're moving through to have that timer going in your head that you know how much time you have left. So again, that's all pretty straightforward. That's all pretty easy. I don't think any of that will take you very long. And as you go back here, so much more time I have left. I have 3 minutes here. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys the cheat sheet I kind of have set up here for the exam. And again, I try to keep it as simple as I could, just from like the steps process. So I have this, and again, I can share it with you guys with your emails as well. But do remember here as we look down through these, that we're going to be utilizing just 5 documents. They're going to issue that prompt to you. They're going to tell you that you have about 5 minutes to get organized, to set everything up. And at the very end, they're going to tell you that you have 5 minutes to download it. Okay, so they actually give you 45 minutes, but you technically will have this little 5-minute window of copying and pasting or attaching a file. That's actually not in that 45 minutes. So you should have a true 45 minutes to write the exam, which is still not a lot of time, right? I mean, that's not a whole lot of time. But the way I'm going to advise you guys to do this is, as we've been doing, have an opening paragraph. I would do 2 body paragraphs and then do a final conclusion paragraph. So not your typical 5-paragraph essay. I would do a 4-paragraph essay and set it up in that way so that you can make sure that you have plenty of time to get through that there. So still have about 2 minutes left. Sorry, guys. I forgot it's not going to let me get through this timer. So are there any questions here at this point before I show you guys what the actual exam window will be?
I did need to say this too. I just got an email just now. Can y'all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That everybody who's taken the test needs to go to College Board and confirm your email so that you can get your e-tickets. You have to do that by tomorrow. So I suggest when you get off, just go and do it today.
And so they'll follow to confirm their e-ticket. They're just going to go on that link that they originally used, right? Like go and log in.
Yeah, I actually have the link in here. I'm not sure if it's the same one, but I can just I'm gonna send it to you too, Mr. Walton.
Okay. Yeah, they'll need to confirm that so they know where to send all the stuff to. Thank you for pointing that out.
No problem. Okay.
Remember, I also shared with you guys that review sheet that has each of the time periods and themes. That's a quick way to review the material as well. That doesn't require a lot from you guys on, putting things together. I think it's a great way to organize your thoughts. I've pointed you to some videos in some of these documents as well. They're really great resources. The crash course videos are a really good general overview over the material. There's a lot out there right now that are doing APUSH reviews. The College Board's YouTube page, I kind of tweeted that out last week of what they're working on and their different speakers they're having come in over each time period. So there's a lot of resources out there like that. So once this timer gets down, this will be the start of the test. It'll then pop up that you'll have the exam question 1. And here's what it'll look like. Boom. Your essay prompt will be right there. And then you'll just start working. Okay. It'll give you the opportunity at the bottom to attach your response directly, or if you want to paste it in there as well. So if you attach it, you can either attach the photo there, you can attach the text file there, and it gives you the whole, again, you want to make sure your AP ID and your initials are at the top of the page, nothing more. Don't put your full name. If you're taking a picture, do not do that. Just put your ID and your initials. And it says it'll take a text file, a doc file, a PDF. So, I mean, I think that kind of covers all the bases there on that. And yeah, then I'm not going to wait this 10 minutes out, but when you get to the very end, it'll tell you, boom, you got to submit now. Here's one last timer. If we don't get it by the end of this 5-minute timer, your scores don't count. And then that's it. Okay. So that's the process. Again, I just wanted to show you guys that. You can get on there in that link I've sent you, and if you want to go through it to kind of see what it looks like, but it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I don't personally, it's whatever you're most comfortable with. If you want to write it out and you don't want to deal with the typing out on a computer, I would just suggest you do what you're most comfortable with. Okay. So if you just want to write it out, that's fine. If you have no problem typing it up in a Word document or a Google Doc, that's fine too. I mean, it's just whatever is easiest. If you're doing it on a phone, that might be easier to write it out and take a picture. So again, I don't think it matters that much. Like generally speaking, it's kind of whatever you're most comfortable with there. Okay, if you guys don't have any questions over that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into kind of my cheat sheet study guide here, and I want to talk through it. And then we're going to jump into last year's, and I'm just going to tell you kind of what the responses look like and show you this other resource. One of the things I do worry about, guys, is when there's a timer, when there's a ticking clock here going on, a lot of times students kind of freak out. I might go over some of this right now, and you're like, yeah, it's pretty common sense. But sometimes, if you've ever been there before where you're taking a test and you get a little nervous, it happens. So this can help your anxiety a little bit if you kind of remember these simple steps. The first thing, when you see the prompt, make sure you read it carefully and make sure you look at really 2 or 3 things here. The first thing is you need to make sure, what are they asking you? They're probably going to ask you to compare 2 things, or they're going to ask you if something changed or stayed the same. Okay, so those are usually the 2 categories that they're going to ask you. They might ask you if you think something evolved. That's really the same as changed. They might ask you if something improved. Again, they're talking about changes, right? They might ask you if something got worse. Again, they're asking about changes. So that's kind of categorically speaking. They're going to ask you to compare, or they're going to ask you if something changed or stayed the same. Next thing you need to look at is, are they giving you categories? You guys know over the last couple of weeks, we've looked at some of these questions together, and sometimes they say, hey, what was a political difference? What was an economic difference? Sometimes they give you the categories. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they say, explain ways that this changed during the Great Depression, and you have to come up with your own categories. So notice, if they give you 2 categories, boom, there you go. That'll be your 2 body paragraphs, economics and social issues. And then next, make sure you understand the time period. I think I've told you guys this terrible example I've heard about, this guy wrote this awesome essay one year about the bubonic plague and how it spread and blah, 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 blah. But the prompt was about how it started. And he wrote this whole essay about how it spread all over the country and how it affected these different areas. He just didn't read it carefully enough to see it. It wasn't asking you about how it spread. It asked you about how it started and what started it. And so, I mean, again, he just didn't read that. He didn't see the time period. So make sure that you see specifically what are they asking you and what's the time that they're asking you to cover this in. So once you do that, move on to the documents. You're only going to get 5 instead of the normal 7. And again, I don't know this for sure. It's just my guess. My guess is you'll probably have 4 written sources and 1 picture. It might be a political cartoon, might be a graph, might be a chart. But usually they give you 5 written and 2 images. So that's just a guess of mine. But you always get more written than you get visuals. Remember when you go through those documents that you go through that HIP analysis. Again, if you're struggling as to like how does this fit, think about the historical context, who was written to, the intended audience, the point of view, what was the perspective of the person writing it, and then the purpose. And honestly, guys, if I had to pick one of those that was most important, it would be the purpose. What's the main idea? What is this document? And here's one other trick too. If you really struggle on one and you're like, I don't know why they gave me this document, think, how would I answer the question if this was the only document they gave me? If they said, hey, how did the Great Depression improve society, and they only gave you a picture of a mall, how would you answer that question with that one document? Okay, so that's kind of a good way to just like focus in on how that deals with the prompt directly. Then the next thing you need to do is you're reading through them, and remember, you need to go quickly. You don't want to spend a lot of time on the documents. You need to group them. You need to put them in groups based on what those categories were. Are they economic? Are they social? Are they dealing with gender? Are they dealing with race? Whatever. You need to be grouping them as you go, and write that down. Document 1 and 4, both are dealing with gender. I mean, you need to categorize them because you don't want to have to go back and reread. I mean, that would be the worst thing you could do for time's sake, guys, is to have to go back and reread something. Okay, that's step 2. Step 3, you've got to go back and start your essay off. Again, I made up the example of Great Depression. You need to start your essay with 2 to 3 sentences about what happened before the Great Depression, that contextualization. So start off with 2 to 3 sentences talking about World War I, coming back from World War I. Talk about stocks, how people bought too many stocks, and then jump into that, okay? And then you have a thesis statement. Remember the thesis formula, X, however, A, B, therefore Y. Since we're just doing 2 body paragraphs, I would just do X, however, A, therefore Y. So, if it's compare and contrast, X, talk about how something similar, however, A, they're different. Therefore, there are similarities and differences between these 2 things. Again, just make it very simple. And then you're going to write your first body paragraph, which I'm going to show you some examples of today. Then you're going to write your second body paragraph. And you're going to end the essay by what happened after. So if it was the Great Depression, you need to talk about World War II. World War II happened next, and the economy recovered, and a lot of people were working in factories, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So that is the really general overview. Again, I have that in this class notes here for you guys. So if you have any questions over that, feel free to ask me. But I do have that there for you if you want to look over that. I think that's just a simple reminder there of what we've talked through. Are there any questions at this point before I show you guys some of the answers to last year's exam? Okay, I'm going to jump into, no, stop. Okay. So this might seem kind of strange, but every year what happens is after they score the exams, they then send you this scoring guidelines, and they say, hey, here's some examples using the exam this year of students that got all their points and students who didn't get all their points. So this is really good for teachers. I get to look back and say, okay, so that's how my students should have answered the question, and that's how they shouldn't have. So just let me show you how they're going to do this and some examples. So first of all, I need to show you the prompt. So this was it last year, just to show you. So for 2019, the question was, evaluate the extent to which the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States from 1890 to 1920. Again, notice what I talked about. They asked about change. So, they're asking you how things changed. And notice they gave you a time period, 1890 to 1920. So if I were doing this, I would have 2 paragraphs. One would explain how it changed, and one would explain how it didn't change. Okay. So that's the question. So let's see how they scored this. So last year, and I want to just read their explanation of how you get the point, so you kind of see what I'm talking about here. Here's how you got 1 point for your thesis. Responses earn 1 point by responding to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning about the topic. To earn this point, the thesis must make a claim that responds to the prompt rather than simply restating or rephrasing the prompt. The thesis must suggest at least one main line of argument development or establish an analytic categories of argument. So think about it. Think about our thesis formula. Do we make a claim? Absolutely. Do we do something that responds to the prompt? That's why I do the therefore why. Why talks about what the prompt asked you. And do we make an argument or establish categories? Absolutely. That's what X and A are. They're categories. Okay. So we would absolutely do that. Here's an example. I want to just read a couple of these of good theses. So these are literally what students wrote that got the points last year. The progressive movement was incredibly successful in fostering political change, such as trust-busting large monopolies and reforming the criminal justice system for youth and adults. However, their failure to advance African American civil rights sufficiently left a significant scar on their legacy, as many issues of discrimination, such as segregation and Jim Crow, were prolonged. And they wrote there, this is an example that suggests a historically defensible line of argument and establish the main analytical categories of the response, including a counter argument. Okay, so again, I know it sounds tougher than it is, but let me show you, they don't even have to be that long. Like, look at the second one here. This is pretty short. The progressive movement in the United States from 1890 to 1920 fostered great political change, such as rooting out corruption in government, eliminating monopolies in business, and by advocating rights for those who had been discriminated against. Okay, they got the point too. So again, it doesn't have to be overly, wordy. I've kind of told you guys that before, but as long as you use that formula, you're going to be safe in getting the point. Let me show you some that were bad. Okay, here's one. I'm going to read this one in the middle. Political, social, and economic change occurred during the progressive era. Okay, it's too vague. Like, they didn't tell them anything. Like, what do you mean political and social and economic? Like, what type of political change occurred? And also, it didn't even tell you, what are you arguing there? What's the argument? Is it that they changed the same? Did they change? How much did they change? You didn't say anything like that. So you can go too general. I'll read you another bad one. During the time period 1890 to 1920, the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States as new ideas were being spread as a result of new policies. It says this example is too vague and does not establish a line of reasoning. Again, they just said political change. They didn't talk about the other category. They didn't even explain what change they're talking about. Again, you don't have to write out a lot, but you've got to give them something to explain what you're going to be arguing for. Okay, so that right there is how they scored the thesis. Again, any questions at this point? I want you to just to think about the thesis formula that we've been using, and that would make it very easy to make sure that you get that point right there. The next point is contextualization. Okay, so remember, this is what happened before and what happened after. And they give you some examples. They're like, look, you can use any of these. You can talk about the growth of cities. You can talk about the expansion of industrialization. You can talk about the development of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. You can talk about the consolidation of corporations. Guys, I want you to notice that's pretty vague. Like the growth of cities, the increase in immigration. Again, you don't have to just give them like line by line detail of some event that happened. You just need to tell them that you know what was happening before and then what happened after. So that's really all that you have to have there for contextualization. And so here's one of their examples here of an acceptable contextualization. So again, this is how they would start their essay. The mid-19th century was a booming time for urbanization, immigration, and industrialization. Towns and cities started moving skyward. People from Europe came to America in hopes of achieving the American dream, and industries such as steel, textiles were booming in the wake of a new workforce. The amount and quality of work in America began to highlight deficiencies in America beyond the workforce. The progressive movement began in response to this. Again, that's a great example there. And they lead right up to the progressive movement. So they gave you the background that led up to that. Again, remember I gave you the example last week about it's like a Star Wars movie, right? They have all those words that come across the screen that say, hey, this is what just happened before the movie started. So again, that's all you're doing in your first paragraph there before your thesis is just setting up the reader, telling them what happened just before this. Unacceptable example, like what you'll see. The first one is in 1890, the census of 1890 concludes there is no more American frontier. President McKinley is finishing the Spanish-American War in 1898 when he gets shot and passes the presidency off to Theodore Roosevelt, who helps the country with progressivism. It says this example did not get credit because it was presenting evidence. It was clearly not relevant to how the progressive movement fostered political change. Yeah, I mean, that's like, it was just too random. It didn't connect. It didn't say that that's where progressivism came from. Like, it was just kind of random stuff. So you want to make sure you connect it. So whatever you're talking about, make sure that you explain, okay, that's what precipitated this. This is what helped cause this. This is what was going on right before then. Okay. So if there's no questions, I'm just going to show you the final part, which is how do you use the evidence, right? They give you 5 documents. How do they give you 3 points for using the evidence, and what does that look like? So are we good on thesis and contextualization? All right, let's take a look at how they do this. So in order to earn 1 point, that's for each one, of using evidence in the documents, the response must address the topic of the prompt by using at least 3 documents. To earn 1 point for evidence in the documents, the response must accurately describe rather than simply quote or paraphrase content from the 3 of the following documents, okay? So you can't just repeat exactly what they say. You actually are going to you have to quote, you can't just quote, you have to accurately describe it. Okay, so that's why I've been telling you about the HIP analysis. If you say one of those things, if you explain it, you'll get credit for it. Here's an example of a student getting credit for it. Document 6 says that the induction of new technology, the manpower in the police department, can now be used to keep the city safer, which taxpayers hope for. There you go. They explain what document 6 was showing. I mean, that's how easy it can be, guys. It's not, it doesn't have to be too hard. Let me give you another example. I just sometimes think students make this more difficult than it has to be. Teddy Roosevelt in document 2 is saying that the state needs to control these business corporations that are becoming too powerful. They're benefiting themselves instead of the workers. Okay, what are they doing? They're telling you the purpose. Okay, they're telling you an explanation of what was the purpose of the document. Again, that's how you get the point there. They give you a couple of examples here of students that just literally quoted it. Like, you can't just take a sentence out of the document and put it on there and go, oh, that's what it says. They know you can just quote it. So you have to do more than that, okay? And then to get the additional point, you have to use it to support an argument, okay? So you have to utilize the document and say, this is actually supporting what I'm saying. So let me give you an example. In a letter to Wilson, the NAACP points out to segregationists that by having segregation, especially in the federal government, promotes inequality. Virtually no political change came about for Black people during this time. Notice what he did. He said, look, here's the evidence, right? This document says that, look, there was still racism. It was still bad, even though this was going on. And so then his point is, his argument was that there was no political change for Black people. It wasn't getting better. So he's like, look, there's an example. That's what that shows. It shows that things weren't getting better. So that's a great use of the evidence there. Let me show you one that's a bad example. Document 7 says that people should vote for prohibition to help the mothers and children in the country. That is a correct description, but notice it didn't talk at all about, so what change did that foster a change? Did it not foster a change? It simply just gave you a description, which again gives you 1 point, but if you want to get all the points, you have to explain how that actually moves your argument forward. And then the last thing you can do with the evidence is if you can point to one piece of evidence outside the documents. So if you sat there and said, look, also I know about blah, okay? And they give you, look at this list. Like, and by the way, it can be a ton of stuff. They give you this list of all of these different things they think would be acceptable. So they think any of these, if you added any of them, it would be good. And let me just give you an example of what they're talking about. Another example of successful use of government to enact change in the women's rights movement, in which the suffragists used to gain the 19th Amendment, was clearly more effective for enacting fully recognized change than the smaller scale, less ambitious idea of Republican motherhood. So they just said, look, we can use the women's rights movement as an example. They would have got credit for that if they want to use that. So again, adding any kind of additional source. This other person used the book The Jungle. One effective progressive reform would be, that was started by the book The Jungle. This book sought to expose the dangerous conditions workers suffered in the meat factories of Chicago, and President Roosevelt immediately took action after the book, calling for legislation to be implemented, investigations to be done, and the FDA to be established, all of which would see to more political power for the federal government. Yeah, he used the book The Jungle, okay? So absolutely, that's a good document to use there as well, okay? And the last one is just utilizing the evidence, okay? That's, again, what I already pointed out there, is that, notice they even say, did you talk about a point of view? Did you talk about purpose? Did you talk about the historical situation? I say historical situation there, the background, historical context. And did you talk about it being relevant? So what was the intent there? So again, as long as you utilize one of those, that's how you get the points there as well. So again, I know that I talked to you guys the other day about the point system, but I hope that in showing you the way students answered it last year, you could see what I'm talking about everything that we've done, everything I've talked to you guys about with these essays. If you do those things, you'll get those points and be able to pass the exam. So are there any questions now that I've kind of gone over all of that? And I apologize again, I know that's kind of tedious to go through that, but I wanted to make sure that you guys saw that and could see what some good examples and some bad examples, because now that you've kind of seen a few, I think that you see that it's not as complicated maybe as sometimes it can sound, but at the same time, you just need to know what exactly you need to get the point. So I hope that was helpful. Are there any questions for me, guys, on any of that?